I was going to mention, the Fillmore East becoming the Church of Rockology or whatever.
Yeah, the Church of
There's how it was groomed into that greatness, though, was stuff happening on the West Coast at the Fillmore West.
Fillmore West in San Francisco,
Yeah.
also owned by Bill Graham, correct?
He perfected the sound system there.
Yes.
And he really perfected the light show there. A guy named Danny, I forget his last name, Danny Williams developed that famous light show. And of course, it became bi-coastal,
Yeah.
So that whole thing, that's when Fillmore East really took off. And, we're talking about a crowd of 2,300 something, right?
Yeah.
Versus on the West Coast, see, they only had 1,003 at the Fillmore West.
Yeah.
So talk about intimate crowds. This sets you up for some awfully great recording, which I'm sure you're going to be bringing out.
It's like you said. I mean, Bill Graham demanded excellence, not just from the performers, but from his own crew. But when the performers got there and they saw how he ran such a tight ship, they wanted to give their best, So it just all fed on itself, and everybody gave their best performances. It was just incredible.
And Led Zeppelin, who kind of got their act together down in L.A., by playing with the likes of Alice Cooper and all of that, really hitting it for the first time after most of their tour, their first tour was over.
Right.
They polish it in San Francisco, baby, and the papers were a-buzzing.
Right.
And the crowning achievement on the East Coast at Fillmore East.
The Who, Jefferson Airplane. I mean, I mentioned the Grateful Dead, but everybody. There was nobody that wasn't playing there. Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, Iron Butterfly. I mean, let's see. Led Zeppelin made 4 appearances opening for Iron Butterfly.
But Led Zeppelin at first was opening for a ton of people.
Yeah.
Vanilla Fudge and all of the bands got to the point, Royce, they didn't want Led Zeppelin opening for them. They, it was like,
who wants to follow Led Zeppelin?
Nobody wanted to watch them after that.
Yes, he hired the bands. I didn't find anything about him having people working for him that went and hired the bands. So I would assume that Bill Graham did hire the bands. I don't know if anybody has any information on that.
I always assumed that it was Bill Graham's magic touch, his personal touch. He was famous for courting the talent, treating them like kings. He could also treat them like garbage if they got on his bad side. He was no angel. But from what I have what do you think, Bruce? Do you know anything about that?
I mean, I've heard the same thing. Like, these places, it's the topography of rock and roll. So, I mean, it's like every documentary you see, like you read books on Zeppelin, Cream, it's all in there. And like similarly, Bill Graham is one of these figures that there are bands that had beautiful relationships with him, loved him. And then, I mean, there have been criticisms as well, for those that kind of got, because he could be stern, strict as far as, as well as you can imagine, being in that business where you have a little bit of that shark element to you as well also.
Right.
So I've heard a mix of stories when it comes to Bill Graham.
And I always just kind of assumed that he was just like one of those guys that saw a buck in everything, but he truly loved the music. He loved the idea of show business. And but everything, he saw the angle, I think, in almost everything he did, even on what he was going to have for lunch.
Jefferson Airplane, live at the Fillmore East, recorded 1968, released in 1998. Janis Joplin, Fillmore East, 1969, recorded February 69, released in June 2022. And when I started looking at this stuff, it kind of blew my mind.
Man, if they, it's better to get this stuff all transferred digitally and everything. Let's get it out. Because it's never, you go, now we need 42 albums by, Peter, Paul, and Mary or whoever, right? Well, yeah. Because guess what, folks? It's never freaking gonna happen again. So this is history. This is musical history. Get it out, man.
Look at Angela here. They should release the 17 encores by CCNR. I would buy that in a heartbeat.
I would too.
Great comment, Angela. Thank you.
They probably did the long version of Susie Q, huh?
That was the first single. The first time I had ever heard Creedence was Susie Q. Blew me away because, it almost had, when he goes into that, oh, Susie, the megaphone. You got to remember, right around that time, we had Winchester Cathedral, that sound. And so, and yet they never quite sounded like Susie Q again, did they?
Right.
Winchester Cathedral, that's the first song I played on the trumpet in the elementary school band.
Well, just a couple of years ago, I'm going to check here to see what it was. Yeah, 8,500. I went to go see Greta Van Fleet at the Bill Graham Civic Center. Right. And that holds 8,500 people. Okay. Now, compare that to the Cow Palace, where I saw McCartney in 76. Right. 16,500 people. Okay. One thing that I noticed at the Bill Graham concert, at the Civic Center with Greta Van Fleet, was, wow, this is it had almost an intimate feel to it. All right. So now think about the Fillmore East and West. I mean, you've got 2,500 probably, they probably got 2,500 people. What a freaking intimate concert and series of concerts those must have been. Can you imagine being in those in that audience, man? It's just awesome.
But that was one of the Stones concerts I did get to see live. 1972, I guess. Yeah. Long Beach Arena.
72. Great time to see them.
Yeah.
Great time.
And of course, Bridges to Babylon. That was another concert tour I got to see. Anyway,
I would have loved to have seen that concert too, because I think that album gets a lot of. It doesn't get its due for me. I think it's a great album. I think they made better before it, but I don't think they've made better since. And it was a strong artistic statement. It was finely crafted songs. The band sounded sharp and a total enjoyment to listen. I mean, it's one of those albums you put on and you listen to it all the way through and you're entertained all the way through.
You put a Stones album on, like Led Zeppelin, the Beatles, and most of our favorites. Well, you listen to it all the way through. You're not skipping.
It's not Sticky Fingers, Royce. Obviously, I mean, it's not their. It doesn't travel like Exile. There's a lot of stuff that it doesn't pass up. But, dude, the time it came out, how old they were when they put that album, I think it's a valid damn Stones album.
When you start thinking about all the songs that they've had that were just just iconic songs,
And the thing is, as long as the Beatles were there, they were one band. But when the Beatles dissipated, they got better. Not as far as writing hits. I mean, those hits in the 60s are just incredible. But the band as a performing band live and now making almost grown-up albums all on their own, and nobody could say, oh, they got the idea from, oh, wait a minute, those guys are gone now. Sticky Fingers, that's what that album kind of just said to me. When I heard that. One
of these long histories that there's multiple eras to really enjoy. I've always been more partial to the Brian Jones era.
Me too.
But then, you have that early 70s run that's like, phenomenal. And I would argue too that, Michael, you were talking about like Bridges to Babylon. I think that latter era of Stones, I continue to like all the singles also that were released. I don't think they released any Duff singles in that latter period either.
Yeah.
And, people don't always have their favorites as far as the eras and stuff. But I think they continue to still hold a very high quality and a very high standard of output.
Yeah, Bruce, I agree. And what about their latest single? Would somebody please tell me what's wrong with Living in a Ghost Town? That's a great track. I mean, that's a classic Stones track. I loved it. And talking about having something to freaking say in, the 21st century, I mean, I love that track. I'm still waiting for the album.